Brianne. I'm going to be talking about the video stuff, so you can all relax. Statistics part's over, and I'm just going to tell you some of the cool stuff we've been finding in the past couple of years. So the importance of video monitoring. The first goal that we had was really to figure out what was destroying these night heron nests, because as Roger said, the predation got really high, so we wanted to know what was causing that. But since we're doing video work, we're going to have continuous data, so we had other goals in mind as well. So with all of this time that these cameras are on this nest, we can really get an idea of what these birds are doing on their nests. So we're able to look at daily time budgets of these birds, and then use that information to relate back to predation events and ultimately nest height. So the cool thing about working on Alcatraz, among many, is that there's a power source, which comes in really handy for camera work. So this is us putting out extension cords. The power source is the soft foghorn, and the extension cords run to DVRs. And these are 4-channel DVRs, so they each have the capacity to run 4 cameras. And this is a camera. If you can see it, it's right there. And so these are micro cameras, very small, and they have invisible infrared light, so we can get information even at night. And so this is just where it's placed in relation to the nest, and you can see that it's camouflaged with local vegetation, so to minimize disturbance to the nests. This year, we were also lucky enough to set up a camera on the raven's nest, and that first picture, you can kind of see how much different a setup this is, because there's no power around the raven's nest. So those are actually 2 very large, heavy batteries. So those were needed to run just one camera for this nest. So the raven's nest, for those of you who don't know, is in the Monterey cypress tree. So we had the tree climber climb up and install this camera, which originally had 4 eggs. Now the raven's nest did not make it. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of footage and explain what happened to the raven's nest. So here it is. This is 4 days after camera setup, and as I said, it originally had 4 eggs, and starting on this day and every few days afterwards, it began eating its nest, or its eggs. So that's what's happening right now, is this bird is actually consuming the eggs out of its nest. And we're not sure if those eggs were the original oiled eggs that were actually oiled to prevent them from hatching, or if it was a new clutch, we can't really say. But the nest was destroyed and the raven started taking it apart after a while. So, but this is some of the information we got, which is a cool finding. So we did get some stuff. So in 2010, we put cameras in 2 different habitat types. So the rubble, which Roger described, and there's an example of a nest that is in the rubble, and then along the agave trail. So in the agave bushes, and there's a nest that you can see in the agave. And we chose these because they've become such important habitats for these birds, but also because they're very close to the power source, which is convenient. So in 2010, we put up 3 DVRs. We had 12 cameras with which we were able to monitor 22 nests and got a total of 17,000 hours of video footage. This year, we have 6 DVRs, 22 cameras, plus the one on the raven's nest. We've monitored 41 nests and have 31 hours of video footage. And that number is still growing because our DVRs are still out there right now collecting data. So with this, we were able to successfully determine that ravens are predators of these nests. So in 2010, we had 5 raven predations on eggs and 3 on chicks up to 19 days old. And in 2011, we had 6 predations on eggs. And so far, we don't have any on chicks. Now, it's important to note that we do have twice as much data this year. So we do have more predations on eggs, but we have twice as much data. And so far, no predations on chicks. This might have something to do with the ravens not having a successful nest. They're not feeding young. And whatnot. So the other thing that we saw destroying nests is black-crowned Night-Herons. And so this is interesting. I use the word predator, but we haven't really seen them consuming nest contents. They mostly just destroy nests, knock out eggs, carry off chicks. We're not really sure of the reasons behind it. It might be a form of competition or a sign of stress on these animals. So in 2010, we saw 1 nest with eggs destroyed and 2 nests with chicks destroyed. And in 2011, we saw 4 nests with eggs destroyed and 4 nests with chicks destroyed. And again, we have a lot more time this year. So it may look like a lot more, and it is more, but it might be comparable.
Can you tell who's doing the predation?
Ah, look at this. You went right into the next slide. Thank you. So this is one of the reasons for video work. And I will tell you that one of these nests was destroyed by a black-crowned night-heron, and one of them was destroyed by a raven. They were both empty nest bowls. Can you tell which one did which? You will find out. So here's some video of some predation events. Just let you watch and see what happens.
Is this the agave?
This is in the agave. Mm-hmm. This had already started by the time this video started. So this predation event lasted 5 minutes. The adult was there 2 minutes before the raven came in and started eating the nest. And you can see, so I'm going to show you 2 different clips, and there's 2 different ways that a raven will predate a nest. So you can see that in this clip, it's actually consuming the egg right on the nest. And I'm going to go ahead and go to the next clip now. So here you see that it picks up the egg and carries it off. So it might be going to cache the egg or consume it and feed it to its chick. So it does both, which is another reason that being able to identify the predator by looking at sign of the nest is hard, because ravens will do both, and then also it can be confused with the black-crowned night-heron. This is a raven predation on a chick, so if y'all are still eating, you might want to wait a few minutes. It does get a little bit gruesome. But we won't watch too much. But there were 3 16-day-old chicks in this nest. You can see it trying to defend itself. But there were 3 16-day-old chicks in this nest, and there's actually 2 ravens doing this predation. One has already taken one of the chicks off of the side of the frame and is working on it over there. And the adult on this nest was last present at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you can see that it's now 6:30 in the morning. So as the chicks get older, the adult is not around the nest as much, presumably. So this predation event goes on until 12:30 in the afternoon. So it's 6 hours long where these ravens are coming and going from this nest. And they leave parts of the chick carcasses in the nest, and the adult comes back at 1:30 in the afternoon and cleans out the nest, leaving an empty nest full. And then here's the last predation event that I will show you. And this one is interesting. This adult came and sat on this nest a few minutes before this took place, and then picked up the chick. You can see it's kind of shaking it. And it proceeds to carry it away. So to get back to this slide, with that, so when we went back the next week in our nest check, this is what we found. So we didn't know what happened to these nests. We couldn't say which one was predated by who or what happened. But by watching video, we know that the one on the left got eaten by a raven, and the one on the right got predated or taken away by a black-crowned night-heron. So that's why this video work is really cool, because we can answer all these questions that otherwise we wouldn't be able to. But so we
black-crowned belong to that nest.
see we can't say from that, because the night-herons aren't marked, so there's really no way of telling. There's some interesting behaviors there where we'll actually see a bird incubating on its nest, sitting there for several hours. I mean, just anecdotally, we've seen birds sitting on their nests for several hours and then they'll get up and kick the contents of the nest out. So we don't really know the basis for this, or if it's stress or whatnot. So after identifying predators, we still have all of this data that we want to compile. So what we've done is we took a random set of days. So far we've looked at 11, but we're still in the process of going through this. And we recorded durations of behaviors during 10-minute segments. So 2 10-minute segments per hour. We took very fine scale data of the behaviors that happen during those times. And then we defined behaviors. So we have 20 behaviors that we've seen these birds do on their nests, but we've condensed it to the more important ones. So those are, like the ones that are that happen the most. So those are resting, vigilance, active vigilance, preening, nest maintenance, and egg turning. And I have examples of all of those. And we looked at those behaviors and compared them between the 2 different habitat types that we had cameras in. So here is just an example of what you see the most when you're watching these videos. It almost looks like it's paused, but it's not. So this is a bird resting, it's incubating, and since these birds, both parents incubate, there's almost always someone on the nest doing this or what else. So the difference between the vegetation and the rubble, so 85% of time in vegetation is spent in this resting, and 93% of time in the rubble is spent in resting pose. And you can see those are the standard errors there in the parentheses. Vigilance is just an act of being alert on the nest rather than, presumably asleep. And so this is an example of vigilance, and 4.4% of time in vigilance, in vegetation is spent vigilant, and only 2.8% of time in rubble is vigilant. And this becomes kind of important later. So active vigilance is not a very common behavior. It's basically just a vigilance with a movement associated with it, which also becomes important later because it's important to know whether the birds are moving around on their nest or still. So I'm not going to go ahead and read those numbers, but you can see the differences between the habitat types. They're not there. Preening is cleaning of the feathers. So this is a bird preening, and this is important in colonial nesting birds because they're so susceptible to parasites. So 1.8% of time in the vegetation was spent preening, and only 0.4% of time in rubble was spent preening. And this could be because in the vegetation the insect community is different, microclimate is different, so there's differences physically between the 2 habitat types, which could be leading to these differences. And also there are, I'll get into that later. So this is the bird egg turning. Egg turning is important for the development of the embryo, so it's a necessary behavior. So you can see that there's not a difference between vegetation and rubble because all the birds have to have this behavior for their eggs to fully form. And then nest maintenance. So this is just building up of nests, and they do this throughout their incubation period. And 2.3% of time in the vegetation was spent doing nest maintenance, and 1% of time in rubble was spent doing nest maintenance. But you can see that the standard errors are pretty big on that one. So after looking at differences between habitat types, we also wanted to look at how behavior changed throughout the day. So we broke the day up into 6 light periods. So early light, starting at sunrise, mid-light, late light, and then early dark, which began at sunset, mid-dark, and late dark. And so just concentrating on the daytime period, you can see some notable differences in behavior throughout the day. And I want you to look mostly at these active behaviors. So preening, nest maintenance, and egg turning were all more common in the early and mid-light periods. And you can also see that resting was less prominent during those periods, which makes sense because it's a trade-off. If they're not resting, they're probably doing one of these other things. And they were also more vigilant during these periods. And if you look, all of our raven predations, 7 of 8 of our raven predations occurred during these early and mid-life periods when they're doing nest maintenance and preening. So it could be that the ravens are cueing into these movements on the nest and being able to find these nests and locate them based on this movement occurring at the nest. So after looking at that and having all of these behaviors compiled, we were also able to take these behaviors and compute some indexes. So we got an activity index, so that's just a ratio of active to inactive behaviors on the nest, so how active these birds are on the nest. And then incubation constancy, which is the percent of time that the birds are in contact with the brood patch with the eggs. So looking at those and how those are affected by habitat type, you can see that the incubation constancy is much higher in those rubble nests and much lower in vegetation, and activity is higher in vegetation than those nests in the rubble. So those nests in vegetation are incubating less and therefore sitting on their eggs, and therefore active more. And you can see this especially during those early and mid-light periods when those raven predations are. And this is interesting to note because we didn't have any raven predations in the rubble vegetation where they're less active and incubating more. So we can also look at how incubation constancy affects nest success to see if there is if it explains variation in nest success. And you can see that those failed nests had lower incubation constancies overall than those that were successful. And we can kind of come to 2 conclusions about this. And we can go back to saying that yes, they're incubating less in those early hours where those predations are likely to happen, but because they're incubating less overall, it could also be a representation that those birds with riskier incubation strategies and maybe less investment in their nests are more likely to get predated. So it may be an indirect effect there. So in conclusion, we now know that ravens are a problem. They are predating these night heron nests. They're visually cued. They might be finding these nests based on these nesting behaviors, and that behavior does explain variation in nest fate. So to leave you, I'm going to play a more pleasant video of an adult with a one-day-old chick.